I recently published a video where I reshelled and customized my own GameCube. Now, I'll put a link to that just up here if I can figure out how to do it. I'm still kind of getting used to the YouTube stuff. But when I published that video, a friend of mine reached out to me and said he wished he still had his GameCube because he wants to play so many classics from his childhood. Now, it just so happens that when I modified my GameCube, I completely forgot to film the part when I added the Pico. So, I've acquired a GameCube. I've got a Raspberry Pi Pico. We're going to smush them together and we're going to make a GameCube for a friend of mine. You can come along and I'll show you how it's done. So just had a thought, it's probably wise to test it before I go modifying it. Because if I take it all apart, mod it, put it back together and it doesn't work, I don't know if that's because I didn't do something right during the mod or because it wasn't working to begin with. So I'm just going to switch to top down now and you can see I've got it hooked up with a digital to HDMI out. It's going into a Genki. I've got a controller in there. So if I switch to my game capture now and power it on, it should, fingers crossed, boot, which it does. And interestingly enough, it hasn't asked us to set the time, which suggests that the battery, the clock battery inside it is still fine. But I am going to swap the clock battery out anyway, just for ease of life and a little bit of future proofing and longevity. So now that I know it works, let's blow it apart and get it modded. So first things Thursday, we're going to make sure there's no game inside it, which there isn't. Then I'm going to flip it upside down. Remove all those plastic shells and then whip out the 4 screws, which are game bit. So you will need a game bit, one there from the iFixit kit and mine. Whip them out. Now I personally like to use the lid and I always tend to put the screws kind of in the area where they came out, purely because a lot of these screws are cut in thread in plastic. And I just kind of always feel like it goes back together if you get the right screw in the one that originally cut the thread. Hope that makes sense. With the screws removed, we're going to flip the console back over. And I don't know where I saw this, but I saw in a YouTube video, a YouTuber said that you should always open the lid before you lift the top off. So if you open the lid, you can then lift the top straight off and that just comes off like that. Pop that to one side because we are going to need that later because this is going back together in this shell, not in a different shell. Once we've got the shell off and out of the way, we've got 2 little plastic tabs here, which holds the controller front on. You literally just pull those tabs ever so slightly, and that will tilt towards you. Do be careful with these, because this plastic is quite old these days, and as plastic ages, it gets brittle. As you tilt this away, you'll see this ribbon cable here. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more for you, actually. If I switch to this shot. Whee, look at that. If you tilt it towards you, you then need to grab this ribbon cable and just pull up slightly. That then comes away as one complete piece. I'm not a huge fan of this ribbon cable. I always feel like I'm going to bend and snap it as I'm pushing it back in, but so far haven't broken one. We are going to need this in a little bit though, because we are going to be swapping out that battery that you see poking out just there. That's what keeps the time and powers the real-time clock. So we're going to swap that for a holder. What we then need to do is remove the same panel essentially from the back. So again, it's these 2 little clips. You tilt that, slides out of the way and lifts up. You'll notice here that we've got 2 cutouts on this one because it's a DOL 001, which is the one that had an analog and a digital video output. Once that's off and out of the way, we've got a lot of screws that we need to remove from around the top perimeter of the console. That just allows us to then remove the optical drive as one piece, and we do need to get under there to do the mod. Now, when you get to the fan side of the console, there are a few screws hidden just underneath the fan, so we do need to take this whole assembly out. So to do that, we're just going to lift off this power cable, and the fan cable can stay in, actually. We can leave that. Unhook the power cable from these little plastic retainers that it's got, and we should, if I've done this right, be able to lift that off and away. So we can. So pop that to one side, give it a clean, because it's probably going to be as dusty as this one, but give it a clean, pop it to one side. And then you'll see that we've uncovered some additional screws underneath. So that does need to come off and out of the way for you to be able to get to those. Once you've got all the big screws off around the front, there's these 4 on the front that we need to take off, and they're a pain in the rear because none of my screwdriver tips seem to fit just well enough. No, that one's not too bad. But most of the time, my screwdrivers are slightly too big or slightly too small. Once you've got all those out, we can just grab the whole top assembly and it should lift off like that. Now you do have to be careful when lifting it off because it does interface with this edge connector, as you can see there. Now you won't do any damage if you just come straight up. You can give it a bit of a wiggle, just give it a bit of a do 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 do, and it'll come straight off at the top. You can break this down further if you need to, but we don't need to for what we're doing. We need to get underneath this heatsink. So once everything's out of the way, we need to remove these heatsink screws. Now, given the fact that this console is as old as it is, and there are thermal pads underneath the heatsink, you're probably going to tear them when you remove the heatsink. I've not come up with a conclusive way of getting that off consistently without damaging them. So instead, I would recommend buy some replacement thermal pads. You can either buy the different thicknesses and cut them yourself because they're not all the same thickness throughout, or Z-Labs just sell a full kit. Again, Z-Labs aren't a sponsor. They just seem to be the most convenient shop for me to buy these things from. So yeah, get a set of these, and apologies for the bag noise. So once you've removed all 6 heatsink screws, you just want to very carefully kind of twist and lift the heatsink off. That doesn't want to come off. It doesn't want to come off at all. We might have to get under this with like a plastic spudger or something. That does not want to go. Okay. I'm not going to force it too much, but we are going to get some leverage in there. So I'm going to come in with these two from the iFixit kit. I'm going to get them under each end of the heatsink, and I'm going to see if I can pry that up and off. There we go. And you can see there I've torn one of the pads. So to be fair, that's not the worst I've done. To just tear the pad there, you could, if you were in a pinch, probably reuse these. I wouldn't, and I'm not going to, because I've got replacements. But if you'd gone in here to clean and you'd accidentally torn the end off a pad, send it. So thanks to a bit of leverage, that is now off. I'm going to give this all a quick clean and scrub the old thermal pads off of this and get the new ones ready to go on. Isopropyl alcohol. So with those pads removed, I'm just going to give this a quick clean with some isopropyl. Now, it doesn't have to be spotless, but the bits where the thermal pads go, you kind of don't want any sort of residue on there. So that's all clean. Let's now give the tops of these chips a quick clean. So we're now ready to start soldering. Yes, unfortunately, this isn't a mod that you can do without getting your soldering iron out, but it's not that difficult. I'm not the world's best solderer, but let me show you. For anybody who's confused from overseas, you're probably used to hearing it called solder. I'm not soldering these joints, I'm soldering them because we're going to be using some solder. And to do that, I've got some wire. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make some lengths. They're going to be way too long, but I'd rather have more wire than I need than less than I want. So I'm just going to get those cut real quick. So once you've got your lengths of wire, what we're going to need to do is get ready to make some solder connections around here. So let me just see if I can zoom in for you. We'll have a look. Probably going to, using digital zoom there because we're all out of optical zoom, and that's as zoomed in as we can get. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be soldering a connection to one of these legs, and some of these little jabbers down here. So to do that, what I'm going to do is just strip the ends of these wires. Now, unfortunately, these wires are that thin and flexible that my wire strippers don't do it. So I just have to use my fingernails. But I did recently cut my fingernails, which is frustrating, but I'm just going to take off a little bit of wire on the end like that. I'm going to do that to all of these wires. So I've got all my wires stripped there, ready to start soldering these on. Now, the keen-eyed amongst you, if I hold these still for long enough, may notice that the black wire has had significantly more stripped off than the others. That's because this one has to bridge 2 connections just down here. So what I end up doing usually with this is I'll tin the entire piece and then I'll sit it just on here and then I'll snip it to the perfect length to bridge those 2 pins. So let's do that now. And once again, I've started a video without putting my soldering mat down. So if I ruin my desk pad, it's entirely my fault. The connection that I need to make is from this pin just here. And we're going to this pin just next to it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a little bit of flux on the board. Like that. And then I'm going to add some solder to those pins just to make life a little bit easier. There we go. So now if I just make a note of how long that needs to be, I can probably cut that in about half. So coming back in with that now shorter, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the end tacked on, clean the tip of my iron, make sure the flat part is pointing to where I want it to point. I'm just going to come in and get that wire on the bottom pin, he says. But yeah, you can see the wires firmly attached to the bottom pin. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat it up and get it onto the pin at the top. Now the difficult part is sometimes when you do this, it heats up the wire that much that it lets go down at the bottom, but it's just a bit of trial and error, unfortunately. Yeah, you can see it's already done it there. It started to let go. So let's come in from this end. See if we can get that melted. Cool, so that looks like it's in at the bottom. It's in at the top. Cool, that looks like it's on there. I'm just going to put a little bit more solder just on this pin down here. I think I've bridged those anyway, but that should be fine. Now, the next place I'm going to try and get a wire is this 1, 2, 3, third pin in up top, just at the top of this chip here. So again, I'm going to go in with some flux just to make my life easier. So with a little bit of flux and without getting my big head in the way, I'm going to try and add a little bit of solder to that. Oh, I'm still getting my big head in the way. This is really difficult without without putting my head in the way. But I'm just going to try and add a little bit of solder to that third leg. Just done there. Oh, I have bridged 2 pins there. Good one, Steve. Not what I wanted to do. So, sorry, I put my big head in the way again there. But essentially what I did was I used flux and the soldering iron just to drag the solder between the legs until it separated. You generally find that you pick up some of the extra solder on the tip of the iron as well. So just give your iron a clean. Finally got that on. Fairly certain my big head was in the way for it. But yeah, that's on. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to blitz through all these wires because it's taken me a little bit longer to get the ones, certainly on this chip, than I thought it would do. I ain't no Tito. I mean, he films him nailing these soldering joints first time. I'm not Tito. So I'm just going to blitz through. I'm going to get these other wires attached and then I'll show you what comes next. Cool, that one's on there now. So that's all the soldering for now. We are going to have to do a bit more soldering once we start reassembling. But that's all the soldering done on the board. So I'm going to give it a quick clean with some isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush. As soon as I remember where I put my toothbrush, there it is. And this isn't my toothbrush. Well, it was once upon a time, but now it's my isopropyl cleaning brush. One of the best features about this toothbrush is the fact that the vibration feature still works. So it just makes it a little bit better for cleaning. I like to think anyway. That's where 9 out of 10 dentists agree. One of the good things as well about giving it a quick scrub with a toothbrush is it's a really easy way to tell if your solder's any good, because if any of those connections fall off whilst you're cleaning, you didn't solder it very well. So that's cleaned. I'm just going to give it a minute to dry. So as I mentioned earlier, I am replacing the thermal pads on this. Now I did also mention that there are different thicknesses. They're not all the same thickness. I couldn't tell you what they are, but I'll link you to the Z Labs product that does actually detail what the thicknesses are. So if you've got some of these sheets already kicking around, feel free to make your own. If like me, you don't and you're lazy, you can conveniently just order a full set for the GameCube from Z Labs. So obviously, big one goes here on the ATI chip. Slightly smaller, thick one goes on the IBM chip, like that. Then these two ones are for our memory chips. Doing this a little bit cack-handed. Perfect. So once we've got our thermal pads on, we want to just drag our wires out of the way a little bit and then get ready to put the heatsink on top. So before we do that, we're just going to lift off these final covers, which are sometimes really easy to get off, other times refuses to let go of the thermal pad. So far we're looking good. It's usually the memory ones. Okay, so far so good. And the last one, nope. And the last one, nope. And the last one, nope. Stop lifting, there we go. Nailed it. First try. So yeah, once we've done that, we've got the new thermal pads on and we're happy that nothing is touching anything it shouldn't be. We're going to pop the heatsink back on top and then screw it back on. So heatsink screwed back on, wires kind of just drifting to the side. We're actually ready to start partial reassembly now. When I say partial reassembly, I mean we're going to put the optical drive back on top. When you do this, we're just going to want to make sure that our wires are coming down through the side out of this corner here. Now, I have seen some people open up this side of the shell, just on this corner, and put the wires in there. Unfortunately, my wires are too thick for that. So instead, what I do is I lay them flat, bring them out through the corner so that they are between both screw holes, and I just sit the optical drive back down. What we're now going to do is we're going to whiz through and put all of the screws in, apart from the ones on this side. So we want the screws in at the front, screws in at the side, and at the back. So now that I've got these screws in around this side, I'm going to put 3 in on this edge, and I just need to be really careful and make sure I don't pinch these wires too tight when I do it. It is going to sandwich the wires, but it shouldn't be cutting through the wires or breaking the sheathing. GameCube partially reassembled. We now need to solder these wires to this Pico. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of lie it down here. And I don't want the wires to be too long, because if I solder them on here, then I've got all this wiring to try and tuck in the GameCube. But I also need to make sure that once this is assembled like this, there is enough room to get the wiring up here and out of the way, but also to be able to lift this out of the way for disassembly. So I need to find like the happy medium, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the Pico up against the shell of the GameCube there like that. Let's just zoom in a little bit more for you, actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the Pico up against the shell like this, and I'm going to make all of my connections using wire that is just a little bit longer than the Pico. So if I snip this off here, like that, hopefully I don't regret cutting that much off. In fact, I'm going to save that for the next one, because I'm a Yorkshireman. But yeah, I think that wiring should be good enough. So I now need to remember what connections we make and where, and I also need to tin these pads on the Pico. So let's do that now. So we need GP4. Now I'm probably going to upset a few people, but I'm going to do this without putting flux on the Pico. So we need, without my big head getting in the way, I wish I could see without putting my head in the way, we need GP, what do we need? GP4. which is this one just here. Come on, one back up. There we go. So we need GP4, which is here. GP4, we then need GP5. We then need the ground just underneath it. So we take that ground. I need some more solder. We need the ground, and then we need GP6 and 7, but they're going to be bridged. That'll make sense in a moment when I say they're going to be bridged. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me just check my diagram. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's perfect. And then we need the 3.3 volts from up here, which is this one just here. Perfect. And my phone just got a notification at the exact time that I finished that. So yeah, so we need those. Right, let's get these down here and let's make a start. So the yellow wire is the first one, and that is going to be connecting to GP7 and GP6. That's going to be bridging both of those. So let's just get that done now. We just want to make sure that we've got just enough wire there to bridge both of those. So I could probably cut a little bit off. Perfect. I don't know if you can see that there. Can we get you in any tighter? Yeah, we can. So that's maxing out my digital zoom there, but we just want to get these 2 points with this wire here. So let's do that now. Oh. That should be both of them, which it is. So that's both GP7 and GP6 both connected there. The next one we want to go for is the ground, which is black. Just pull a little bit off there. And then what I'm going to try and do is lie all these flat as well. So if I just come in from this side, get this onto the ground. That way, with me lying the rest of them flat, it doesn't actually matter if any are slightly long, because their length can just go that way. Whereas for this one, it would have ended up bridging something. The next wire that I then want is green. Now, I will actually put a link to the Pico documentation that will show you all this. So don't worry about colouring. It's not relevant unless you copied my colour coordination. So again, we're just going to attach this green wire. That is going to go to GP5 for me, which is sat just above the ground on the Pico. And there's that one. And then the next one for me is the blue one. Which again, just going to nip a little bit off there, just to expose a little bit of wire. And then that is going to attach to my GP4. That's on there. And then the final one is the 3.3, which is going to go just on here, facing inwards. But the rest of these wires are currently trying to spin the Pico around, so we'll do the best we can. And this is obviously going to power the Pico. I did read something in the documentation about powering it a different way, because this isn't apparently how you're supposed to power it, but it's worked for all my other ones. But there is newer documentation on how to wire it the correct way. So yeah, your mileage may vary. Perfect. So all of those wires soldered up now. You can see we've got our 3.3 volt here. We've got our GP4, GP5, then our ground, and then we've got these two, which are GP6 and GP7 bridged. So if I just zoom out a little bit again now, all we need to do is sit the fan back in, which we've got here. Let me give that a quick clean, actually. Cool. So once we've given the fan a quick clean, what we need to do is bring it back in over here. So the way we took it out, just like that. And then as we screw in this screw just here, we're going to want to set our Pico just there. And then that just keeps everything nice and tidy and out of the way. I will put a link to the STL that I used for this little Pico holder. There's a few different ones. I've seen ones that hold them back here. I've seen ones that hold them sideways and all sorts. But that's the one that I like. And I'm using the one that I like. So we are going to get the screw back in. Perfect. And then the final screw, which is on this side of the fan, down here. Then once you're reassembling it, what I do is I just tuck this wire in just out the way down here. And then don't forget to get the power switch cables back in the little guide when you plug that back in up here. They sit in that little guide just to keep everything out of the way. So we've got those in there. Pico's now mounted to the side. So the final thing we have to do is the battery holder. So to do the battery holder, you'll need your port cover, which we took off earlier, and you need to remove these two screws. With those two screws removed, you can lift off the front and we can see the watch battery on the front. Now what we're going to do is heat up these two solder joints and pop that battery off real quick. So one leg out there. And the other leg out there. So just to double check, positive went to, oh, it's labelled, look. It's labelled on the PCB. How handy is that? I'm going to focus and show you. Yeah, so you can see there we've got positive, we've got negative. Now I need to remember where I put the battery holder. I am terribly unorganized. Where the hell did I put that battery holder? Oh. Found it. Now, before you go soldering your battery holder to the board, you quickly just need to work out the polarity of everything. So, the back and side of a watch cell battery is positive, generally. It'll tell you. So if we look at this one, you can see here we've got positive symbol there, and we know that that's the top and the side because there's this line of division which separates the bottom from the rest. So if we look at the coin holder, we know that when this coin cell sits in here, this prong is going to be touching the bottom, and this prong on the side is going to be touching obviously the side. So positive, negative. And that's just an easy way of figuring that out. So what we do now is we take this and we put the negative in that hole and then the positive in that hole. Now I could if I wanted to clean up the solder on these and tidy them up a little bit, but instead what I'm going to do is burn my thumb, come in here, and I'm just putting pressure on the negative leg. I'm going to heat that up. Once the soldering iron gets warm, I'm going to heat that up and push it through. So that's gone in and that's sat flush. So I'm going to then flip this around and I'm going to put pressure on the positive leg. And again, I'm going to heat that up and pop that through. So that's gone in there and that's sat perfectly flush. Then what I can do, if we zoom in a little bit, I'll show you some more. What we can then do, let's give it some digital zoom. Once that's in there and that's sat flush, which you can see there it is, we can just feed a little bit more solder onto these legs. So we'll do that there. Just to make that look a little bit tidier. Once that's done, and you're happy with that, we've got a little holder in place. So you can see we've got that, and that's very nicely soldered, if I do say so myself. We can then pop the coin cell in just like that. Oh, just like that, it says. Just like that. I should have gone in that way first, but that had moved a little bit when I soldered it, so I just went in that way first. But yeah, so that's the battery in place now. And that means that in the future, when this wet dies out, super easy to swap. Just swap it for a CR32. Providing they're still available in the future. Who knows? We are ready to actually reassemble the console. So what we need to do first is get this ribbon connector in here. So I'm just going to zoom in so you can see how much of a pain in the ass this one is. So you have to get this pushed into there, and I always worry that I'm going to snap this off at this point. So I'm going to do my best to push this in without snapping it. Nope. There we go, that's in there. Once you've got that in, just sit the bottom in, slide it up, and it'll clip back in with those clips on the side. We then need to add the back one back in. Like that. And then with the top still open on this, let's get that sat in. There we go. Now, before I put the screws back in on the bottom, I know I've reassembled it for the most part, but I am just going to power it up, power it on, make sure it works. So if we eagerly switch to game capture now and I power it on, it should, fingers crossed, work. Cool. So it's asked us to set the language and set the time. So I'm just going to grab a controller real quick. And now I've got a controller, we can set the language. Cool. System settings have been lost. Yeah, that's fine. We'll set those again. Calendar. So we'll set the calendar. What is today's date? It is the 22nd. Oh, it's the 22nd. The 6th. Oh. 2025. At our time, it is currently 19. 20. Oh, no, just gone 21. Cool. And then come out of that. That's set that. So what I'm going to do real quick is turn it off. Pull the power. Try and power it on a few times. Just to make sure there's no residual charge anywhere. Pop power back in. Try to do this without looking. Can't do it without looking. It's like being a teenager again. There we go. Power it back on, and it should have remembered the time this time. The time this time. You know what I mean. So it's not prompted us for any settings. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do, the part that we all came here for. I'm going to install this, is it SD to SP2 or SP2 to SD2? It's an SD2 SP2. Cool. If you don't know what that means, on the bottom of the GameCube, we have expansion ports. Let me just show you. Top down. Yeah, so on the bottom of the GameCube, we have these expansion ports. This one is known as SP2. What people make is this SD card interface, which slots in there. And I really love the way that this is actually just printed on the PCB, and the PCB makes the key, if that makes sense. So on it, it says this side face outside, which means that way. And then it says this side face inside, which is obviously this way. So it sits in the bottom of the GameCube, just like this, like that. And it gives us a micro SD card interface to the to the GameCube. What that means is that if my Pico mod has worked correctly, it will boot from the SD card. So let's try that now. So if I switch back to Game Capture, I power it on, should boot. Oh. Oh. Oh no. Why didn't that boot from the SD card? Back in a minute. So I have absolutely no idea what's going on at the minute. If I take my SD to SP2 and my micro SD card, boots fine. If I put my micro SD card in the other SD to SP2, boots fine. I've formatted the SD card and I've copied the files back again and it boots into Swiss. Look, I'll show you. So it boots into Swiss, then gets stuck detecting the DVD drive. But it's booting into Swiss, which means it's reading the SD card. So I've no idea what's going on here. If I put in, oh, my light's just gone out. If I put in the other micro SD card, it boots fine. So it's not the SD to SP2. It's not the Pico install. It must be the SD card, but it's booting Swiss. Let me try a different model of SD card and see what it does. Okay, so I've been fighting about with this for quite a while, and I've figured out that Swiss does not like the SanDisk Ultra micro SD card. So I was swapping my SD card around, SD to SP2s around. Now mine uses a 128 gig SanDisk Extreme. If that's going to focus, might not. No, it's not going to do. Try the hand trick. The hand trick? Yeah, so mine uses that, and that worked absolutely fine. But what is weird is it would boot into Swiss, which lived on this SD card. It just wouldn't load anything else. So finally got it working with a SanDisk Extreme. So I'm going to power it on and show you what that looks like. So power it on, cross our fingers for some consistency, boots into Swiss, loads the games. So I'm quickly going to try Wind Waker, purely because we've got it here. So we're playing a legitimate backup of a game that we own. All right, Nintendo, fire that up, see what it does. Detecting video mode, patching dolls. Nice. And it's booting. Yeah, let's play in 60 Hz mode. Perfect. So yeah, I'm going to turn that off, just because I don't need that sound in the background while I'm talking to you. But yeah, hopefully this video turns out all right, because towards the end, it all went a little Pete-tong. Because of an incompatible micro SD card. If anybody in the comments can explain to me, though, how it booted into Swiss, but wouldn't boot into anything else. Mind you, it only booted into Swiss after I tried my SD card. Why would that make a difference, though? It definitely was booting into Swiss with this one in, but wouldn't load anything that was on the SD card. I wonder if that cached somehow when I tried that one. I don't know. It's weird. But it's working. Nate, I hope you enjoy your GameCube, and those that watched, I hope you enjoyed the video. So I appreciate that. Give me a thumbs up. Drop me a subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And by more content like this, I mean a Yorkshire bloke farting about with classic consoles who has no idea what he's doing. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.